this panel we set up with the idea that we were going to be talking about kind of frontline community engagement programs. And as I got to know Josh, and I have known Carrie for a long time, what we have in this panel are people who are well experienced both on the programmatic side, given the organizations that they're working with, but also a long history in business and policy. So I'm not going to give away their own bios, because I'm going to sort of toss it to them and ask them to talk about their path to the National Council on Aging and the Boys and Girls Club of America. What's really interesting about these two organizations is if you read their mission statements, so National Council on Aging, Boys and Girls Club of America, their missions are remarkably similar. And they've been around for a really, really long time. So we'll touch a little bit on the history of the organizations, how they have changed and moved to adapt to kind of address the new problems that we're facing. So Josh Hodges is the Chief Customer Officer, the National Council on Aging. And I love the fact that this nonprofit organization has a Chief Customer Officer. I asked both Josh and Carrie for what is the one thing that doesn't show up in their bio. Josh immediately said, I have a 15-year-old and a 1-year-old. And he's also a flag football coach. Carrie, who I've actually known for quite a while, I was at Schwab when she was at Schwab. She just recently retired from her corporate position, 4 decades.
Well, I include my teenage years for sure.
And is now sitting on the board of directors at Schwab. I asked her here in her capacity as the Director Emeriti of the Boys and Girls Club of America.
Chair Emeritus.
Chair Emeritus. So when I was catching up with Carrie a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, okay, what are you doing in retirement? She said, I'm perfecting my topspin. It doesn't sort of do justice to everything she is handling. So anyhow, thank you both for joining us today. And I already gave Josh a heads up that I'm going to ask him a question. Since he flew from the East Coast, he's been with us all day. So Josh, start us out with what did you hear today that had you go, oh, or or hmm?
Well, first off, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. And I am on East Coast time, so it is definitely late for me. I think I didn't hear anything that said, oh, I've not heard this before, but it's so interesting because I go to a lot of meetings similar to this, and I hear the same themes. The themes of health, the themes of economic security, the themes of caregiving, and how these things used to be treated almost separately, but now we recognize that they are so intermixed, they're so intertangled, that we can't solve one without looking at the others. At the National Council on Aging, we have historically set ourselves up to have a health team, an economic security team, and a workforce team. The reality is your health is your wealth, and your wealth buys your health. There's a disproportionate reality that the systemic barriers that many, many individuals in this country face prevent them from aging well. And so, as I get a chance to hear all of the great speakers that were throughout this morning and early this afternoon, just that interconnectivity of all of these different things, and how I think Ken challenged us this morning, we have to think through big solutions. And that's why I'm excited to be here.
Great, thank you. Carrie, I'm going to ask each of you, I'm curious about your backstories, since they're both non-direct, non-linear, circuitous. How did you end up not only navigating through your career, but how did you become involved with these community engagement programs? Carrie, why don't you go?
Okay, I'll go first. So you kind of got a hint. I did start at Schwab when I was a teenager, when it was a startup. But fast forward when I was.
You said it was in your dad. You told me where your dad was working when. I'm sorry, I'm derailing you. Keep going.
Oh. Well, what do you mean?
Never mind.
Okay. We'll have a conversation afterwards. Anyway, in my early 20s, I became a broker, and I was living in Atlanta and serving clients, with financial planning and investments and so forth. And it was in my very early 30s. I think I've just had, maybe 1 or 2 of my 3 kids at the time. I was a young mom working, so forth, just focused. And to be honest with you, I never really knew much about philanthropy. I mean, I remember hearing my mom doing some things at the local hospital or something, but philanthropy was not in my vocabulary. And it was, again, when I was in my early 30s, a friend of mine who was in financial services asked me to join her for a dinner with a group of other women in financial services. And she brought us together to ask if we would be willing to raise $50,000 a year for 3 years on behalf of women's economic parity. And I remember going home that night and I tossed and turned all night. And I tossed and turned for 2 reasons. One is the whole idea of fundraising and ask people for money. That was super scary to me. And $50,000 was a lot of money, especially for, at that time and for a, 30, whatever, 1 or 2 year old. But the other thing that happened to me is that she took a match to this pilot light that was in my belly, that I was so excited to think, what? There's an organization that I can give back to, and I can help women with their, finances and their, having, sort of equal pay and all, equal skills to raise a family and have a working wage. So I was one that did sign up. Not everybody did. It was an intimidating ask. And as it turned out, I ended up being the #1 fundraiser, and then I ended up being chair of that committee. And of course, so I let my drive and my passion win out my fear of failing. And it was from there that, I mean, by the way, I equate philanthropy to like chips and wine, where you just can't have one. And so I ended up going on a board of a nonprofit for at-risk girls and being chair of that. And so anyway, my philanthropy had bloomed, and word got out at Schwab, and Martha, you'll probably remember this, that I was very passionate about, again, women's, lifting women economically. And so I was asked if I would run the Charles Schwab initiative to help more women become confident with their investing. And 20-something years ago, or now 30 years ago, I mean, it's still the same, unfortunately. Women, far more women than men lack confidence in their investing abilities. So I ran that, and it was a big investing platform, books and educational stuff and workshops, so forth. But because of that, then I was asked to run the Charles Schwab Foundation. And the executive at the time who had it underneath his, in his group, he said, make it your own. And at the time, if I had done that, it would have, the focus for Charles Schwab Corporate Foundation would have been financial literacy or something similar for women. But of course, I was not going to do that. I wanted it to be inclusive. I wanted to be reflective of our heritage and our passion as a company, which was always about making investing accessible. So I refocused the strategy, of course, on financial literacy. And as part of that, we were a small little group. It was just after 9/11, didn't have a lot of money. And I'm thinking, how do we have impact? And so we did a national search, and we came upon the Boys and Girls Club, which is of America, which is the largest facility-based youth agency in the country. It has over 5,000 clubhouses around the country, or sites, and serves about 4 million children from K to 18. And together we created a financial education program. It's been, the basics of financial education, from savings and budgeting and needs versus wants and investing, and all the things that hopefully everybody in this room understands, but things that not everybody in this country ever learns. And we've had well over 1 million kids in the program. And so you could say I've been involved with Boys and Girls Club for 20 years or 20 plus years, starting as a corporate funder, then serving on their trustees, and then, as you mentioned, the National Board of Governors. And I was chair the last 2 years. And I have to brag, I was the second woman to chair the board in like over 100 years. So that's my affiliation in terms of really getting, financial literacy out there. And of course, we've done a lot more programming, other national programs as well since, but this is the one. Boys and Girls Club, because they're such a strong organization, has been our partner for a good 20 years.
There was a comment this morning, and I think, Cara, the panel you were talking about, that was a little debate about financial literacy, but I think an agreement that actually was mentioned in a couple of panels, that sort of training kids early in financial terms is really quite even more critical today if you talk about living long lives, because they're going to be making decisions straight out. So, Josh, a little bit of your backstory.
Sure. So after school, I jumped right into management consulting and was in the DC area doing a lot of management consulting, looking for an opportunity to maybe jump into the federal space. And at the same time, I was witnessing my personal story, which almost everybody in the aging space has one, watching my grandmother's decline and watching the fact that she did nothing wrong. She saved the money. She was a nurse nurse in the 50s and 60s. She did nothing wrong and yet aged into poverty. And that bothered me. That bothered me just from an intrinsic, like, how do you do everything right and still lose? And how is that possible? So I had a chance to connect at Health and Human Services, the federal agency that kind of oversees these programs, and they were looking to bring somebody in to run the CLASS Act. CLASS is an acronym we won't get into, but it's a long-term care program that was a good idea at the wrong time, and it would have been a national long-term care program similar to Social Security. So I jumped in there, and it was there ran federal programs and did a lot of grants to community-based organizations for about 10 years. Then had an opportunity to take a role at the National Council on Aging. We're one of the oldest national nonprofits that funds community-based organizations. We're one of the largest re-granters. In other words, we take large pots of money from corporate partners or federal, and we help connect to local communities. And that's how I've been there for 5 years, and really, it drives me because I just keep going back to those stories. And my grandmother is one story of literally tens of millions in this country that are impacted every day by the aging disparity we have.
So I'm going to ask a question about sort of your view from a senior leadership position and also a governance position. And given the length and history of your organizations, what's changed? What's gotten harder in managing community engagement organizations? And has anything gotten easier?
So I think we've actually changed a lot about how we connect to community-based organizations at NCOA. And it really starts with, initially, we would give grants to the aging organizations, the local organizations that dealt with older adults in the community with the idea that you should go out there. But we've really, under a more equitable grant-making process, have really rethought and restructured how we connect to communities. We're no longer looking at just the aging organization. We're looking at the community-based organizations, the organizations who may be in depth, whether it's a housing organization, whether it's a intergenerational organization, and really looking to see how do we connect more in the community. I think that's the number one. The second, of course, is what we talked about at the very beginning, which is we got to stop thinking about these programs in silos. We can't think about funding an economic security program and a health program that may be co-located in the same area but don't talk to each other. It's well past time that we start thinking about dollars going into the field must be universally focused on helping people age well, however that implies in the local communities.
So as a governor, what I have seen is that Boys and Girls Club thinks big, right? Like I said, it's probably the second largest youth agency in the United States, and we touch so many lives. And so we've always been about impact and scale. You asked also some of the things that we didn't think about. But one of them we've heard a lot about is workforce development, and how we don't have young people really ready to work. I mean, I know that's kind of a worldwide issue right now, and also we want to help young people be healthy and productive citizens. So a couple of things that we've focused on in terms of having that impact in that scale is, first of all, focusing on social and emotional awareness and awareness and skills. And that's, I think someone said earlier, I'm not a scientist or or a therapist, but it's the basis, the foundation for how you set your emotions and navigate them or regulate them. And then there's the soft skills that kind of go with it. And Boys and Girls Club wants to be an employer of choice. I mean, not employer of choice, have employees of choice out in the world as these young people graduate and either go to college or to trade school or to work. And so there's a huge focus on soft skills, such as critical thinking, conflict resolution, impulse control, things like that, which is hugely important, and which is also the building blocks for other life skills, such as financial literacy and workforce readiness. So it's in every program, starting with arts, sports, academics, you name it. We're trying to teach these young people, again, just those soft skills that they can take to whatever they do in their adult life. And then lastly, we have 1,200, I think it's 1,200 501c3s around the country. It's a federated model. And our charge is to make sure that every one of those club systems are strong and impactful with the community. So the headquarters provides a lot of resources, consulting, training, such as, or even hiring of CEOs, training new CEOs, program experts. I'm trying to think what else, but resource development. So all sorts of help to get, or government access, or access to government funding and so forth. Again, it's just all about making sure every one of those organizations are strong, and we have strong leadership with the board and with the CEO.
I suspect that 50 or 60 years ago, they were not talking about social emotional behavior.
No. And now it's more important than ever.
Yeah. Josh, what about you?
Hey.
I'm sorry. So Carrie went into some of the program development. What programs do you have in place today that are kind of new within the last 20 years?
I think in the last 20 years, we've really been focusing in on that intersectionality and recognizing how do we serve older adults where they are. We're really growing our community-based organization partnerships as well, focusing in on we run the National Institute for Senior Centers. There are 10,000 senior centers in this country, rough estimate, serve about 1 million older adults every day. And that is where that's the community hubs that people go to. And so how do we create programs and support for older adults in those community centers? So we're doing a lot of work with that, but it really starts with going to the communities and listening to what they're hearing. We have been way too long dictating to local organizations the type of programs they should be running and doing a lot less listening to what is actually happening on the ground. I had a good conversation at lunch with somebody talking about the fidelity of programs. And the reality is, especially in the DC world or even the national world, we create programs and we want them to be operated with fidelity at the local organization, instead of saying the local organizations know what's actually happening on their ground. So how do we create a flexibility? How do we increase the connectivity on the ground? And that's what we're focusing on.
So put on your futurist hat. What do you think, how do you think your organizations are going to look different in 20 years? What trends do you think you're going to have to start paying attention to that may not be operationally on the radar right now? Carrie?
Well, I think right now, I think we'd all agree that there's a lot of things going on in our society today, and it's greatly affecting kids. And I know we've been talking about the pandemic, we don't stop talking about it, but the repercussions are huge on youth. I mean, and it doesn't even really matter what economic background you're from. With the isolation, there's just a real aftermath of all that. And then you add, obviously, social media, the divisiveness of this country, overt comments about different kids. And remember, we don't deny one kid. We don't care where they're from, what they do, whatever. But we see how it really affects these young people. There's a lot of trauma out there, and it's definitely, we're going to have a whole sort of generation of, I'm going to say, mental illness unless we take the bull by the horn. And so Boys and Girls Club has implemented trauma-informed programming, which means that every single staff member knows how to manage behaviors, or any issues that the kids might have. And then the kids are also taught on how to manage feelings and so forth. And in fact, I was talking to the CEO of the LA Metro clubs, and he said that the California Justice Department gave them a grant specifically from the Department of Justice for reducing violence among young people. And he was telling me they have now calm corners, and together the state paid for these case managers, and the case managers identified about 150 of their kids that could potentially end up in juvenile hall. And so these case managers came up with this calm corner, and now and they've got to go there and again learn, you know, probably meditation and so forth, type of things, and talking about their feelings with the case manager. And now kids are self-selecting as well. It's not that they're, yeah. So it's interesting. And they're seeing outbursts or any type of, you know, hitting each other, whatever it may be, way down. So that's a big one. So trauma-informed is definitely a big area.
So there's three that I think are, I mean, 20 years is a long time horizon in this world. But I think, I mean, I'm thinking, we talked a lot about them today. The first is decumulation. So as we moved away from pensions and into 401ks, we've talked a lot about savings. There were some really good panels earlier talking about the need for that. But we haven't really trained people at how do they decumulate their wealth, especially if they don't have access to financial advisors. That to me is a major crisis right now that's happening. And as retirements become 30-year, maybe 40-year retirements, how you manage your wealth is a vital part of it. So that to me is the one of the number one things. The second is caregiving. We talked about caregiving significantly earlier. You know, there's a dearth of 1 million direct care workers right now. We need 1 million extra direct care workers than we actually have, the supply versus demand. And we're also going to see a movement towards long distance caregiving with the increase of the IT systems, with the increase of the systems. You're going to be managing your care from states away, from whether it's your parent, your spouse, your brother, your sister. It's going to be a long distance caregiving, something that I don't know that we as a group have really faced at the level we're going to be facing in the near term. And then the last is just dealing with the information overload. If you look at just the number of Medicare Advantage plans that an older adult has to look at an individual year, since the Affordable Care Act, it's skyrocketed. And so that's just one example of many information overloads that's happening to older adults. So how do we create just-in-time information systems for older adults so that they're able to make the important decisions they need to make, whether it's on Medicare or any of the other ones?
Well, as someone who's 64 and will be dealing with that shortly, can you solve that soon?
There are a lot of interesting solutions out there, but no, I don't have it yet. I got 20 years, right?
Yeah, maybe a year, 2 years. One of the important tenets of the new map of life, Stanford Center on Longevity's new map of life, is our belief in the great benefits accrued through intergenerational connections. And we've talked about it over the course of the day. I know a big piece of how Boys and Girls Clubs do what they do is their mentorship program. So talk to me a little bit of both organizations. What do you do, and are you trying to foster these multi-generational connections?
So I'll start. So let me just take a step back. It's sort of at the core of what Boys and Girls Club does, and what actually one of the reasons that we chose Boys and Girls Club is our partner at the time is because they are staff-based. They're not volunteer-based, which a lot of organizations, you know, rely just on volunteers. And we wanted the consistency not only for our programming, but also for the youth themselves. So there's not only the Boys and Girls Club, the staff with the kids, but there is a collaboration with the local schools, with the local police, you know, and making sure these kids all stay on the right path. And then obviously there are volunteers, and families are a big part of being included in these organizations. And just a couple things about that that's kind of new to me, I admit. But let me start. But Boys and Girls Club does focus on leadership programs, academics, civic and philanthropic engagement, and again, social, emotional, and physical health. So the whole complete child. And you know, you talked about sort of the intergenerational aspect. You know, an older person being important to somebody's longevity. The most important development time for a person is from 0 to 3 years old. But the second most important time in a youth or in an individual's lifetime is their adolescence, which is 10 to 19. And that's when they, they develop and acquire attributes and behaviors. And that's why Boys and Girls Club focuses so much on, on the whole aspect. So including, diet and physical fitness, and again, good grades, emotional constraint, and so forth. So all that, so that they can take those skills and behaviors in to adulthood. And what we're finding also with trauma, and or just bad behaviors, these, the stats are showing kids are going to be more likely to be, heavily into drugs or alcohol or obese, right? Or, whatever you name it, if you don't take care of this at an early age. And another, this is not really related to what you're talking about, but it's an issue we have in this country. But I think there's about, I was told by the national organization, there's about 5 million children who are teenagers that they're called the opportunity youth. And these are young people who are neither in school or at work. So that is an area, by focusing on teens, we are trying to make sure we have every carrot possible to bring kids into a Boys and Girls Club, especially teens, again, so we launch them during their adolescence for good behaviors. And
so, I mean, we talked earlier about the importance of connectivity and community, and I think that's something that we look for across our organization. So one of the benefits of being a national organization is we get a chance to work with communities across the country and get a chance to hear what's working. So I was in New Orleans maybe 6 months ago and had a chance to go tour a senior center, which was co-located with a daycare center. And that was a fun place. And I mean that. There's the vibrancy, a livelihood. And so we're able to take those examples and demonstrate that to other organizations. I mean, I think that to me is the future, where the older adults coalesce. How do we help create an environment where that's also a place that the youth coalesce? And I don't have all the solutions there, but I think that as you start looking about what's working in these individual communities, ask the question, why is it working there? And how can we nationalize this? How can we replicate this in a meaningful way? And I think that to me is how we start those conversations. There is so much of a need, and I think the last panelist used the very famous cigarette statistic, right? Like loneliness is 15, or I've heard 20, it depends on your number. A high number of cigarettes per day is the equivalent of loneliness when it comes to health outcomes. There are ways that we can create systemic opportunities for more connectivity, and that's something we should all be looking for.
Yeah, looking for those intentional places, those
Exactly.
intentional ways where different generations are coming together. I think we have time for one question. Anything online?
I just have a couple comments that I didn't talk about that I'd love to mention about sort of some of the changes, at least with youth agencies. I just think people will find it very interesting. Two things. One is the greater awareness of child predators. Is a really big deal that's come out in the last few years. Obviously, we've read a lot in the paper, and with an organization like Boys and Girls Club, and of course, any nonprofit organization, trust is the only way we survive. And so, while we've always had safety top of mind, we have made it a mission, critical. And so we brought in, lawyers and specialists or experts in this area, youth, safety, and implemented a lot of new requirements, higher standards and so forth in terms of the physicality of the clubs. We mandate background checks. We have internal and external safety assessments. So we'll bring in a third party and then we do our own. And then every board has its own safety committee. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is, and this might be the case for you too, is this evidence-based requirement now, where nonprofits are required to make sure that everything's evidence-based informed, which has an interest. It's really important because we want to make sure that our programs are having impact. But it costs a lot of money for a nonprofit. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it does cost more money and resources. But what's interesting for Boys and Girls Club is that it means we have more structured programs, or we have to have structured programs to be able to make sure it's evidence informed, where in fact, another big portion of Boys and Girls Club was drop-in services. And so there's less of that. So, there's the pros and there's the cons. Yeah.
So I dare say, Josh, as the flag football coach, did you have to get fingerprinted?
I did. I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Took a couple trainings too.
Yep. Yep.
Didn't help my team win though. But
Thank you both.